courtesy of BAWL. Sports.com, Stitcher.com, iTunes, where you can subscribe to this lovely, sexy, wonderful podcast for free. Tune in media for your mobile devices, Google Play Podcasts, and we are also on Spotify. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the show that we so lovingly call BAWL on Bulls. A show totally, utterly, and foreverly dedicated to the Chicago Bulls and NBA talk. I am Big Dave.
LC Dub.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, what's up, man?
Everything's great. I mean, I'm very happy. You know, Bulls are great. So, you know, life is great. You know, everything's all right.
The White Sox in the playoffs and the Bulls.
White Sox in the playoffs. Yes,
a good coach, right?
Yes, Bulls got a good coach, a good front office, and now we're going to find out if we have good players. And so it's just good. It's just good.
And the Bears are 2-0.
And the Bears are 2-0. I mean,
somehow.
This is the beauty of sports because of all the trash, the sheer flaming trash that 2020 has been. You know, at least I can still look at my sports and say, hey, those teams are doing, you know, well, those teams are doing good. And, you know, still have some kind of semblance of joy for that. So, yes, thank you for that. And thank you, Bulls, for being competent. We appreciate you. But I'm very excited because we have a guest with us today. This is someone, Chris, you know, I've talked about having him on the show. I don't know how many times to you. Mm-hmm. I've been wanting this person on the show just to talk about this, but just to have on my show because just how much I really do respect and care for this person. He is the reason I'm on television. He's the reason I'm on Bulls Outsiders. I know I credit Fred for even introducing us and getting us, you know, in the same room together because, that's why I love Fred so much. But he is the manager of studio content for NBC Sports Chicago. He is the creator and the head of Bulls Outsiders, and he is my friend. He's a wonderful person. Most people call him Bulldog. I know him simply as Kev. You all can call him Mr. Kevin Anderson. Hello, Kev.
You don't need a mister there. By the way, I will contend one point you just made.
Sure.
You earned the spot on Bulls Outsiders. It was not given.
Thank you, sir.
For a day. I mean, come on, man. It's a journey, man. Like a lot of people do this. Come on.
I appreciate it. He's told me that before.
Kev was like, that's the easiest decision he has ever made.
Yes. It's a layup.
It's a layup. It's a layup. Yo. But how are you, Kev? How are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. I mean, it's amazing, like, you get to the Bulls and how much has changed within the organization in the last 6 months. Like, it is top to bottom, the feeling that the fan base has about this team is a complete 180 from where we were in March. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, I mean, it's exciting. And we're going to get into it. I definitely want to talk about that, man. But I have a crap load of questions for you because there's a lot of things I want to ask you, and they're not all basketball related. So we'll get into basketball in a little bit.
No question is off the table.
And when when he told me that, I said, excellent. Excellent.
I want to hear what Dave wants to hear.
I had so many questions. Okay, so first, because I've never asked this, but I always wanted to know how you got started. What began your journey, like, to where you are right now? Like, were you a big sports fan as a kid? Did you get into it in college? Like, how did you start out knowing, and how did you just know that, yo, I want to be in sports and be involved in that some kind of way?
So it started as a kid. So I'm from Maryland, from outside D.C. And ever since, honestly, I could remember, so I'm talking like, you know, young age, ever since I could walk, really, the Redskins games were a huge event in my family. And it was my parents had this group of about 7 or 8 other couples who a bunch of them had kids around the same age at the time, and Sundays during the fall became an event around Redskins football. And so it started with that, and it really was this, you kind of developed this appreciation and this love of sports. You know, certainly at a young age, I was playing sports, you know, t-ball, soccer, and you know, all the kids sports what they get into. And In terms of like actively watching sports, it started with football. And then in the mid 80s as a kid, my introduction to basketball was through Magic Johnson. And I absolutely fell in love with the NBA and the game of basketball because of Magic. Watching him, because they were on national TV all the time back then. It was on CBS, right? Back in the 80s before NBC got the television contract and the iconic John Tesh music that we all know with the Bulls dynasty, right? But for me, it was growing up watching Magic, and there was just something about the way he played where it was like artistry. It was watching like Picasso on a basketball court, and I fell in love with the game of basketball watching him, and certainly the rivalries that he had with Bird and the great Lakers teams he had in the 80s. And even though I'm a kid from Maryland, watching the Lakers to me was just like the tops. It was, I absolutely loved it. And then, certainly in like the early 90s, I got really into University of Maryland basketball. And because of, in fact, you go back and, you talk about like moments you remember. I one of the most earliest memories I had, and it's funny because they happened like 4 or 5 months apart, is the Challenger disaster in January of '86. That's one of my earliest like holy crap moments that you remember as a kid. And then 5-6 months later was Len Bias dying. And Len Bias was, YouTube the guy, man. Like he is to me one of the all-time great what if stories out there. He was absolutely amazing. He was on Jordan's level playing against Michael in the ACC when Michael was at North Carolina and Len Bias was at Maryland. And I just, it's one of those things where, God, I wish that Len had been a little smarter and that the culture around him had been a little bit better and that he had been able to have an NBA career. But, in terms of like basketball, like certainly Len Bias, Magic Johnson, and then in the 90s, watching the Bulls certainly was an event. For you guys, certainly C-Dub and Dave here in Chicago, it would have been like a times 100 from what I was experiencing.
1,000.
On the East Coast, but like certainly they were appointment viewing and they were amazing and so much fun to watch and watching honestly Maryland basketball in the 90s with like Walt Williams and Joe Smith and then the eventual championship with my favorite college basketball player of all time, Juan Dixon.
Wow.
2002. So
he was so dope.
Like my appreciation of sports, my love of sports was kind of passed down from my parents. And just kind of grew with just, with my friends and certainly watching games. And it kind of went from there. So that's how like my fandom kind of was created at a young age.
No, man, walk me through though what experiencing Len Bias was like in Maryland, because the stories I've heard and, that I hear about him, people just, like you just raved about him and things like my older brother, he just raved about him and everybody raved about him. But what was it like actually being there in Maryland, experiencing that?
So at the time, I was born in 77. So Bias, I would have been fairly young, like 8, 9 years old during Bias's heyday. And so like my memories of him are going to be different from someone who was in their 20s or even 30s, certainly at the time. But from what I remember about Len is you couldn't take your eyes off him when he was on the court. Like he was like a transcendent player that you knew immediately outside of playing a couple matchups that he was by far the best player on the court. He just had this grace and ability that was it kind of was like remind me like watching Vince Carter in college. Watching Vince Carter at North Carolina, I was watching Len Bias in Maryland. Just had that ability and that showmanship and that flash and that you watched him the entire time. Like the greatest in-game dunk I've ever seen in person was a dunk by Vince Carter at Cole Fieldhouse in Maryland when he was with North Carolina. It was an one-handed alley-oop that like he went up 12 feet and threw it down. It was absolutely insane, and it happened like 15 feet in front of me too, because I was sitting on press row at the time in the late 90s. But that's the biggest comp I can give you is what Len was like Vince.
That's saying a lot, man. And he was huge too. I mean, he was just an in-shape human being. And the fact that he got drafted by Boston, I always laugh at, because it reminds me kind of, the how unbalanced it kind of is now, with the Western Conference and Eastern Conference, because the West kind of keeps getting these guys. But back then, I'm like, wasn't they just coming off a championship and they turn around and they go get Len Bias? Like, how does that even work, man? Boston was crazy. But yeah, man, it was a tragic, really tragic tale, man. It's up there with like Hank Gathers and, people like that. Like, that's what I think of when I think of Len Bias. But yeah, people always raved about Len Bias and his greatness and everything I've watched on him and all the people I've talked to. So yeah.
You know what's kind of interesting about that, and it certainly would have impacted me at a young age and would have impacted anyone in Maryland, is it scared me off of drugs forever.
Wow.
Right?
That's interesting. Wow. That's very interesting.
Because it wasn't the secret of how Len died. It was like publicly out there. They had a cocaine overdose, and that also this wasn't a situation in which it was his first time doing cocaine. It wasn't like he got drafted, he's like, I'm going to go out and celebrate, and then his first time doing cocaine, he died. That's not the case. There was a cocaine problem across the entire basketball world at all levels in the early to mid 80s. I mean, we heard what did Michael call that his first rookie year Bulls team?
What
circus or something?
Cocaine circus. Yes.
Yeah.
That would have been literally the same year that Len died. And so, right after, a year before rather. And so at the time there was this cocaine issue within the 80s. And that's certainly one of the big things that Stern turned around at the time. But I can remember being 9 years old when Len died, thinking this is the biggest drug PSA they could ever want, because there were kids, like for me, I was like, there is no way I'm ever going to throw away my life and my potential doing something like that.
Wow, man.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because in your head, you're like, if I do this once, I may just die.
Yeah.
And that's, and that greatly influenced your life. And I like that story, because like little things like that, and that's a sort of like a, I hate to say it, but that's like a blessing in disguise kind of thing, where I'm pretty sure you're not the only one that was impacted that way.
Yeah, there were other kids. I mean, you saw, the thing is, that was this huge wasted potential. And you know what's kind of like ironic about it? I still have a black and white photo, framed black and white photo of Len Bias shooting a jump shot over Michael Jordan.
Wow.
And I have that photo because to me, it's an amazing, amazing photo, because, well, number one, Len is like literally 4 feet off the ground shooting a jump shot. Like it's absolutely insane of how high he is off the ground. But to me, that photo, and I've kept that photo, I've had that photo for good 25 years now.
Yeah.
I've kept that photo because it reminds me of the complete difference our choices in life make. Right? Like we had two people with unlimited potential in both of them, and their careers and their lives went in complete opposite directions because of a choice Len made in June of 1986, and really before then, quite frankly. And so that photo reminds me of the choices we make in life and where we go, that it is almost always our choice where we go, and where certainly what Michael has become, and what happened to Len. Like that photo, every time I see it, just reminds me of what we are in control of.
Absolutely true, sir. All right, so you're a big sports fan as a kid and everything. So you get to college, and what decision are you making in college to say, I want to be around sports as a job?
So it started before college, right? So I was heavily influenced by Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser.
Okay.
Not as PTI,
No,
as
no.
you know now,
Those writers.
as columnists for the Washington Post. Because growing up outside D.C., my parents got the Washington Post every single day, and my true gateway to the sports world, besides what I saw on TV, was through the two of them. And I at a young age decided, and I want to say around 12 or 13, that I wanted to get into sports as a career in some way. And that was actually kind of really heavily influenced by my father, because my dad worked for UPS for 32 years. He drove the package delivery trucks that we see all the time for about 7 or 8 years, and then drove their 18-wheelers for the rest of his career beyond that. And he worked hard. Like, my dad worked really hard, working 50, 60 hours every single week. And it wasn't a job that he loved. He didn't hate it, but he didn't love it either.
Yeah.
It was his job. Like, it was his way to provide for his family and put food on the table, and give his 2 sons and his wife as good a life as he possibly could give them. And he told me, like, at a young age, when it was like, you know, what do you want to be when you grew up, right? When I was like 7 years old, I wanted to be a paleontologist. Like, that was like my career dream. It was to, like, dig up dinosaur bones and look at dinosaurs. I loved dinosaurs as a kid.
Me too. I did too. Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't? Like, who doesn't love?
I was obsessed with dinosaurs, man. Stegosaurus. Oh my god, one of my favorites, man. I was obsessed with brontosauruses because they were so huge and they didn't eat meat. I don't know why. That just blew my mind.
Oh wow, I learned something new. Okay, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, they were vegetation. Yeah, they didn't eat meat at all. Yeah, at all. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I learned that you like dinosaurs. I didn't know.
I
like dinosaurs.
Them. No,
I knew you told me you liked it, but I didn't know you was like on that level. Like,
no, I loved every book I could get my hands on about dinosaurs. I wrote book reports just to write book reports on dinosaurs. Like, I know dinosaurs.
I know Jurassic Park came out. You guys must have. Well, I did too. I lost my mind.
Yeah, I was there. Go ahead.
Jurassic Park is one of those, like, moments in it as a film goer that you never forget. Like, if you saw Jurassic Park in the movie theater, you remember that experience your entire life. Yeah. Because that's when, like, CGI went from that's pretty fake, I can tell that's fake, to holy shit, there's really dinosaurs.
Right. Exactly. Just like that scene where they stand up and Laura Dern stands up and they see that big old huge brontosaurus just walking around. Just everybody's feeling. Yep, absolutely. Right.
I was just in the car driving home. My parents, I just kept saying, no, they were like real dinosaurs on the screen. Like, how they do? Like, it was dinosaurs on the screen. I don't know what happened.
I couldn't understand. I couldn't fathom. It was amazing. But yeah.
So I was getting off a dinosaur tangent. So, but when I was a kid, I wanted to be a paleontologist. But as I got a little bit older, you know, I wanted to do something else. And my father told me, he said, if you find a career that you are passionate in, you will never feel like you worked a single day in your entire life. And I really took that to heart, and I just made it my goal at a young age to find, like, you know, I saw my dad working 60 hours a week, and, you know, he was working overnight shifts, and it was hard, and it was a lot of time away from the family, and, you know, he didn't love it. Like, he was just paying the bills, and so I said to myself, all right, I'm gonna try my damnedest to get a career in something that I actually enjoy. And so it started with that. And my passion for outside of watching sports was through Kornheiser and Wilbon. And initially, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write for the Washington Post. Like, I wanted to be a columnist. I wanted to be a writer. And I in high school, I was, you know, wrote for the school newspaper and started to, when I was like freshman and sophomore in high school, like, that was my goal at the time, right? And then as I started to go through high school, I started to develop this appreciation for broadcasting. And I started to really think about, God, if I could do play-by-play of basketball, that would be like the dream, right? That would be the absolute pinnacle if I could do that. And so I started practicing doing play-by-play, playing video games. Like I would dissect and listen to NBA games and how they were called, and I would listen to how Al Michaels would call a football game and what the difference between radio and TV broadcasting was, and I really got into the weeds with it. And like Kevin Harlan was absolutely like must-watch TV for me. I mean, Harlan's been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
He's been at a high level for a long time, and so like he was a big influence on me at the time, and so I wanted to go in for radio and TV broadcasting. At the time, I was convinced I was going to go to the University of Maryland because they have a really good journalism school. But then I started to pivot and think, okay, I may want to go into radio. And so there was a Division III school called York College of Pennsylvania that I ended up going to that had a really good radio program. And so I actually went to school to do radio broadcasting as a career. And I made doing play-by-play my absolute goal in life at the time. I would like take notes and I would listen. I mean, I would really work at it. I would practice doing games at the Division III level. And by my sophomore year, I was broadcasting every basketball game for the men's team at York College on the radio.
Wow.
And I loved it. Like, it was amazing. I still have like cassette tapes from all those old games, right? That I kept. And so I had at the moment, I was like, I convinced I was going to go into radio, and my career was going to be radio doing that. And so, as you guys probably know, in the broadcasting world, the internship is probably more important than the actual degree.
Correct.
Like it just is. The experience you get hands-on in an internship in a professional environment is just as important as that degree. And so at the time, the biggest sports radio station in Baltimore was WBAL Radio, 1090 in Baltimore. And so I typically, when people do summer internships, they line up those internships in like April before the summer. I called and found out who ran the internships at WBL Radio in January of that year. And I got an interview and I got the job. And they said, all right, call me back the second week in May and I'll let you know what your schedule is going to be. And I was pumped. Like I couldn't wait. It was going to be absolutely amazing. You know, it was after my sophomore year in college. I was going to learn from some of the best in the business, doing like Orioles baseball at the time, and just learning about how radio was put together. And so I said, great, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Second week in May called. I called him back and I said, okay, when do you want me to start? I finished school on Wednesday. I can be there Thursday if you want to. And the guy at the time said, I got a really bad news I got to give you. I lost your information. I don't have any room for you to internship with us this summer.
Wow.
And I was devastated.
Yeah.
I was beyond devastated. And he knows he messed up, right? Like it wasn't on me. He knows he messed up. And he said, hey, we're in the same building as WBAL TV. I'm friends with the sports producer down there. Let me give him a call, give him your information, and if they have any internships available on TV, are you interested? And I said, absolutely. Like, you know, I'm not going to just like waste my summer. I said, if I end up doing TV internship for the summer, so be it. Like, great, it's doing something, right? Because to me, like, there's no like one path to get from point A to point B. We all have our own individual journeys.
True.
And as long as you are even inching towards that goal of where you want to be, you're making progress. And so 5 minutes later, the TV producer, Colin Ward at WBAL TV at the time, called me and said, hey, I just heard what happened on radio. Do you want to intern with us this summer in TV? I've got a spot available. And I was like, hell yes. Absolutely. Like, I'm not going to say no. When do you want me? Right. And so I started my internship in TV, and it became a transformative experience because I found out really quickly that I had a very big aptitude for television production. and they invited me back to volunteer over Christmas break, and I did. And I came back the following summer. I came back the following Christmas break to internship with it. And meanwhile, at this time, I'm still in college, and my goal is still in my heart to do radio.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've found out that I'm pretty good at this TV thing, but radio is still really what I wanted to do. And I actually got to the point of which I was decent in college that a Hanover, Pennsylvania radio station hired me to do play-by-play for high school football in Pennsylvania. And so I was on my path for what I thought was like where I was going to go. And it's funny, my first true paycheck that I ever got in the business was for $24.75 doing a high school football game in Pennsylvania. And I never cashed that paycheck. I still have it framed.
Really? Oh, man.
It just number one, it meant so much to me at the time that I didn't want to cash it. And it was only $24. So it was like, I'm not going to really miss this money. It's like, I'll just get, bum off some friends for some beer for the next part of it.
The working man's diet. Yes.
Yeah, exactly right. And so that moment really just meant so much to me. I never cashed that paycheck, and I framed it instead. And so I was on my way to what I was hoping for, a long career in radio broadcasting. And during my senior year in college, in January of my final semester of college, the TV station I'd been working at, interning at, BAWL TV, said, "Hey, we're bringing in this anchor from Memphis named Damon Andrews," who Damon actually went on and worked for Fox Sports Chicago after he was in Baltimore with me for a while. So some people may remember DA. And they said, "We need a experienced producer with him. We want to hire you to produce weekend sports for Damon."
Wow.
And I was still in college.
Wow.
And I was like, yes, absolutely.
Right.
And so I basically gave up my weekends, my Saturdays and Sundays, my final 4 months of college to produce weekend sports at Channel 11 in Baltimore. And I came back, and I was still obviously doing that while working at Sears at the time, selling TVs and VCRs and DVD players to make some money after I graduated college. And 2 months after I graduated, the full-time producer, sports producer, left, and they offered me the job.
Wow.
So I'm 2 months out of college, and all of a sudden I'm the executive sports producer at a top 25 market in the country, and I couldn't say no to that opportunity. And it was a full-time gig. Yeah. And so that moment in making the decision to do that, I had to let radio broadcasting go at the time, because there was no time to really do both. But I don't regret it, because I've had an amazing career from that point. And like so I took over that job in the summer of 1999. And that is when the Ravens just started to get really good at the time. And so I'm just a year into the job, and all of a sudden the Ravens are in the Super Bowl, and I'm covering a Super Bowl team. And then a year later, the Maryland basketball team wins the national championship, and I'm covering that. So like it was awesome. And I had some amazing people that worked with and helped me along the way, which I always try and pay it forward with everything I do, especially when it comes to interns and internships and just really anybody who wants advice in the business. In fact, I'll say this right now. If there's anybody listening at all who wants advice on TV broadcasting, hit me up on Twitter. It's Kevin_NBCS, and I'll help you out the best I can, whether it's answering a question or just giving you some advice, or ask away. Just hit me up, because there are a lot of people that helped me off along in my career. They want to do the same thing. So kind of flash back to 2004. I was 5 years in the business. And the one negative part to it is I had hit a ceiling if I wanted to stay in sports at the local level, right? Because I hate, and I mean with a capital H, TV news, right?
Okay.
I'm talking not like sports part of it, the news side of things.
What do we hate about TV news? Just it's harder to do, or just don't
No,
care? What?
no, it's the approach of the first 10 minutes of the show are crime.
Right. Bleeds it leads. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's a very real thing. And just like I could see the emotional energy being sapped from the people that worked in the newsroom.
Big. Okay.
And I had several opportunities to go that direction. And I knew that if I did, I'd be able to make a career out of it, but I wouldn't love it. You know, and I absolutely loved what I did, and I didn't want to lose that passion. I didn't want to lose that fire and enthusiasm that I had for my career because all of a sudden I was doing news instead of sport, right?
Yeah,
so
news is like monotonous, right? And sports is like unpredictable, so to speak, right? And of course, there's emotional aspect to it.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah, news is not fun. You're right, C-Dub. Like it's monotonous. Every day is the same. In sports, to me, is always different. There's always a different storyline, a different player, a different outcome, different teams, right? And so I luckily was – so when you work at a local affiliate level, you talk with all the other NBC affiliates that you trade stuff with. Like I knew the producers. In fact, I remember talking to Mark Shanowski when he was at NBC here in Chicago because he needed something from Michael Jordan with the Wizards, right? Because at the time we were covering the Wizards in Baltimore because we didn't have an NBA team, so we would cover Jordan's return to the Wizards. I remember talking all the time with the NBC folks here in Chicago because they wanted all that stuff. I mean, as you guys know, it's a huge story.
Yeah.
And so I can remember a conversation I had with Mark Shanowski, who wanted some stuff from Michael Jordan with the Wizards and called me up. So you talk to all the other NBC affiliates in your division, right? That whether it's no matter what sport it is, you trade stuff with them all the time. And specifically football, you trade stuff all the time. And so I got pretty close with the NBC guys in Washington, D.C., who were the George Michael Sports Machine guys.
Oh, man. Shout out to George.
Yeah. So,
my childhood.
I would talk to them once a week because we would trade. They didn't have the Nationals at that point, so they would want Orioles stuff from us all the time, and I would want Wizard stuff from them or maybe University of Maryland stuff if we didn't get down there. And so I talked with them once a week for 5 years. And then all of a sudden in 2004, I got a call from a guy named Joe Riley, who was at Comcast Sportsnet Philadelphia, and he had been hired to be the assistant news director at Comcast Sportsnet Chicago. And they, in the summer of 2004, were starting a new network in Chicago. And Joe said, hey, I got my buddy in D.C., Steve Dresner, who I asked him, is there anybody in the business that you think would be willing to come out to Chicago and is pretty good? He said, give this guy in Baltimore a call, Kevin Anderson. And so that's like this business is all about like networking and just like, and unfortunately, and it's not good in some sense of who you know and who you make connections with. But it worked out for me because Steve Dresner, who I'd never met in person in my entire life, but I'd had many phone conversations with, said to Joe Riley, give Kevin a call in Baltimore. And so this was in the July of 2004, and Joe said, hey, we're starting this all sports station in Chicago, which at the time Comcast Sportsnet DC had started, and certainly Comcast Sportsnet in Philadelphia. The original had been a thing for a while, so I knew what they were going for. And he said, are you interested in coming out to Chicago and doing like a formal interview with that? And at the time, I had plateaued staying in sports at the local affiliate level. And I said, what the hell? Let me hear about it. And so we scheduled a conversation a week later. And at the end of that hour-long phone interview, he offered me a job to come out to Chicago. And this was on a Friday. And they said, all right, let me know by Monday because, we need people out here. We're starting October 1st, but there's a lot of lead-up time to that, and we need to get going. And so I talked with my family, and even though I didn't know anyone within 700 miles of Chicago, I was like, fuck it, let's do it. And so my brother and I drove out to Chicago. I was living in Lombard. I signed a 9-month lease in Lombard because when we started, our facilities downtown weren't ready. They weren't going to be ready until March 2005.
Okay.
We were working out of the CLTV headquarters in Oak Brook.
Yeah, yeah.
We were basically like sharing space, leasing space out of Oak Brook. And so Joe, who hired me, said, I'm doing the same thing. I'm moving from Philadelphia. This apartment complex in Lombard is doing 9-month leases. That's what you should do. So I did. And I've never really been inside Chicago before. So I took those 9 months to get to know the city and where I wanted to live. And that's how my career kind of started from there. I was hired as an associate producer / video producer in 2004. And then my career's kind of gone up from there.
What is the biggest difference you think between what you did in DC and kind of what you did in Chicago, just in terms of the cities, or is there any difference, or are they kind of the same?
So you mean in terms of the job or the actual cities themselves?
Both, like the job and the cities themselves.
I'll start with the job. So the job, when you're working at the local affiliate level, you have a 3-minute sportscast to do, right? 3 minutes goes by really quick. All of a sudden, instead of doing a 3-minute sportscast, I was doing a 30-minute show or an hour show here in Chicago. And the absolute great part about it is everybody was completely focused on sports. When you're at the local affiliate level, you're fighting for resources. You're fighting for time. You're like, hey, we need a photographer to go out to Ravens camp because we need to talk to the head coach and quarterback today, right? And the newsroom says, well, there was a double shooting on the east side. We need that photographer to go to that. So you don't get to get your photographer today. And so you're constantly fighting for resources at the local level if you want to do sports. And when I came to Chicago, there was no double shooting you had to go cover. It was you figured out what sports and what teams mattered, and you covered that. So like the resources and the focus on doing all sports was just like it was going from a 8-bit video game to all of a sudden playing on a PlayStation 5, right? The difference was so startling and in a good way, so staggering in a good way that I felt like, wow, this is amazing, right? Like, I loved it. Like to be around people who cared about sports and watched sports all the time and talk sports and were passionate about it every day as a job and as a career. Like that environment was fantastic, and you had people that worked really, really hard to be the best they could and make the show the best you absolutely could. So like that was the main difference from a career standpoint. And from a city standpoint, the thing that was like because I've lived on the East Coast my entire life prior to 2004, and I've been to all of the East Coast cities: New York, Philadelphia, DC, Baltimore. Never been to Boston, but the main East Coast hub there. And the main difference that was startling to me was that people wanted to live in the city of Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? Because like in the East Coast cities, like no one wanted to live in the city.
Yeah.
You wanted to live in the suburbs, right? You wanted to live in Baltimore, in DC. You wanted to live in the suburbs. And so the startling thing to me from a city standpoint was like living in the city and having these like amazing city to live in. And so like from a cultural standpoint, that was awesome. Like I wanted to do that and live in the city. And so I lived on the north side. I moved to Lakeview in 2005, and I've been on the north side the entire time. It feels like I move west and north every couple of years by a couple blocks or a couple of miles or so, but I've been on the north side the entire time. But I love the city of Chicago is amazing. I love it. Like the people and the passion they have for sports here, and the city itself. Like this city is amazing, man. Like if this city were a warm weather climate, it would be the destination city around the number one in the country and around the world, right?
Yeah.
It's November through March that scares people off.
Yeah.
But as we know, not this year because of everything with the pandemic, but in a normal year, the summer months in Chicago make it the greatest city in the world.
Absolutely true. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, at some point, it will be warm all year round. We don't know when. I want to step back.
It's going to take some time, maybe 5 years from now or 500 years from now. But you're right, man.
It's coming.
I want to step back to something you said. You said, you know, when you started doing video, you found out you had an aptitude for video production. A lot of things go into video production. I want to know what are those things that you that you're really, really good at video production wise that you didn't know that you would be, and how did those skills, you know, get you to the point where you're at now, where you're in Chicago, the big city.
Yeah, so it's storytelling. It's visual storytelling. And so when you're doing a highlight, even if it's a 45-second highlight of a football game or basketball game, right? You're still a visual storyteller. And what I meant by like have an aptitude is that I had this knack for editing and visually putting together the highlight that made the most sense and also told the story as much as the broadcaster doing the highlight read, the host doing the highlight read. And I also just had this kind of knack for like understanding what made a really good soundbite. And that may seem like a really trivial thing, but I could instantly recognize when like, okay, that's like the best story angle. It basically kind of like news judgment, if you will. Like developing news judgment and what made for a good angle for a story or a good soundbite is something that has to be developed. And I developed that really quickly. And so I was able to like combine those things into putting together a good sportscast from a production standpoint, and work with everybody else. And part of the other huge thing in TV that is so important is that unlike radio, in which you have a handful, 1, 2, maybe 3 people working on a production, in TV, you've got 24 people, sometimes more, working on a newscast and a sportscast. And it basically, the difference is it's like going from playing doubles tennis to playing football, in that you have to work with everybody else in order to get the show done well. And if one single aspect of a football play, if one single player, if one of those 11 guys is not doing the right thing, everything collapses, right? Mm-hmm. Like if your left tackle thinks that it's a run play and the quarterback audibles to a pass, the entire play will break down very quickly if the left tackle doesn't know what's happening. If the running back, if the quarterback, if the tight end, the receivers aren't on the same page with everybody, and the flip side on the defense too, right? If everybody doesn't follow their assignment exactly how they're going to, it breaks down. And the same thing happens in TV. It is a complete team effort to get a show on the air. And I found that I really enjoyed working in that team environment, and that I was able to kind of thrive in that environment and also use my position to make other people better as well. And maybe that goes back to watching Magic Johnson play in the 80s.
Hey.
I did everything I could to make everybody else better at the same time too.
I love the subtle analogy you put there. You know, you're saying you're the point guard, right? Or you're the quarterback or the coach of the team. And you know, so what is Dave? Is Dave like your star running back, or what is he?
Yeah, so like I'll continue that analogy. When you are producing a show, you are the offensive coordinator.
Okay.
Right? Like you're calling the plays. You're telling everybody else, here is the play that we are going to execute. And then it is up to everybody else on the production team, from the director to the host to the people running audio and the highlights and tape and the graphics people. They run the play that you call. And so I would say for Dave's the star running back. Maybe sometimes he's the quarterback, depending on the segment that you're in. But as a producer, you're the offensive coordinator. You put together the game plan, you call the play.
Okay.
And he calls it well. I got to say that. So
Try,
he
you
calls it
know,
well. Yeah. But
I
I
do my
have.
best.
So let me ask you. So you're here in Chicago. You know, you're comfortable. You're doing awesome. You know, at NBC Sports Chicago. Where does the idea to do Bulls Outsiders come from for you?
So that idea actually came out of NBC Sports Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So they, because of the Warriors and because of how successful that team had been, they found that everything they did from a Warriors content standpoint, people watched.
Yeah.
Right? Because I mean, it was the greatest show on court, right? Like it
Yeah.
was, you couldn't, and that was even before KD got there.
Mm-hmm.
Like watching Steph and Clay and Draymond and that team play was and if you were in the San Francisco, it was appointment viewing. It's like what we had in the 90s for the Bulls.
Mm-hmm.
You did not miss a Bulls game ever. It didn't matter if they were playing the Atlanta Hawks or the Sacramento Kings
True.
or the Knicks.
Yeah.
You didn't miss a game. And so they were fine. They found gold in this Warriors team, and they had the Warriors games on their air that they could not do enough content. That every single thing they did around the Warriors, people watched and consumed. And so one of their web writers had this idea for starting a Facebook show called Warriors Outsiders, in which him and another guy, after the post-game show, would spend 15 minutes just from a fan's point of view talking about the Warriors. And it blew up. Like people were like, yes, they can't get enough Warriors. They were like into it by the thousands. And so they were like, let's make this a TV show. And so they made it into a TV show, and people watched it because it's the Warriors. And so they were finding success using this model of having two non-traditional TV people do TV, and basically fans talk about their team in a very different way that they would do on the post-game show. You didn't have former NBA players on the Outsider show in Bay Area. You had a guy who was a writer most of his career, and another guy who had been a Division III basketball player, but who had been just a basketball fan. And so they had fun with it, and the unique approach of their show and what they were doing resonated with a lot of people. And at the same time, the Warriors are winning championships, so people are tuning in. And so we're under the NBC Sports umbrella, obviously, as everybody knows. And so our executives in Stamford, Connecticut, which is where NBC Sports is headquartered, noticed the success that they were having in Bay Area and said, hey, if any of our RSNs that are doing basketball, here's this model that you may want to consider doing. And so going back, 2 years now, Dave?
Mm-hmm. 2 years.
We decided to pursue doing a Bulls Outsider show in Chicago. And so Kevin Cross, who is our general manager, VP of content at the time, basically said to me, I want you to run point on putting this show together. I want you to find the right mix of people to put on this show. And so this was back in, it may have been July or August of that summer. I started compiling a list of every notable personality on Bulls Twitter I could find. And I reached out to everybody with two requests. Number one, is this something that you'd be interested in auditioning for? Number two, is there anyone that you think would be interested in auditioning the show? The requirements being, number one, that they are a diehard Bulls fan. That was it. They had to be passionate and love the Bulls. And so I reached out to a lot of people, including our guy, C. Red Fred, who recommended this friend of his, Dave Watson. And basically, I contacted all these people. I said, here's what I want from you. I want to just shoot it with your phone, with you on camera. Give me a 1-minute video of do you remember what the topic was, Dave? I'm blanking on the exact topic that I asked. It was something about.
It was Jabari Parker.
Jabari Parker. Yes,
yeah.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
On why you agree or disagree with the Bulls signing Jabari Parker.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to see how comfortable people were on camera. when they had to talk to a camera and not talk to a person, because that makes a big difference for broadcasting. And number two, I wanted to see if they could make a good argument for or against why Jabari Parker was a bad or good signing for the Bulls. And so that was their knowledge test on if they were true basketball fans. And so I probably got about 36 submissions from various people for that. And I basically went through and chopped that list down to 12 to 15. I think it was about 12 people who I felt like had potential, right? And one of the things that I really kind of pride myself on is being able to spot talent and spot potential, even in other people who can't see it in themselves. I kind of have this ability to see the potential in everybody. And this isn't like just for broadcasting, now that I'm speaking about it out loud. It's just in anything. I can see in life. I can see the potential in people. No matter what your skill set is, if you have passion for something, and often I can see that potential, and then luckily bring it out of people. So I was looking for how knowledgeable they were about the Bulls, how passionate about what the Bulls, and how comfortable they were on camera. Because unfortunately, someone who is really uncomfortable on camera wouldn't work. Whether it's they're not comfortable with themselves or are just being on TV. If you didn't have a certain comfort level in yourself and talking to a camera, it wouldn't make for a good TV show. And so I basically took it down to, I think, 12 to 15 different submissions that we had gotten. And then I went with Kevin Cross, John Shipman, who's our director of studio content that we have, and Michael Allardyce, who's the head of digital. And I said, okay, I want you to grade each of these 15 people on a scale. It was honestly very similar to a draft big board.
Okay.
I personally had everybody, like 1 through 5, grade each video on 5 different attributes, right? And I made a spreadsheet with everybody's submissions and tallied up the points and said, okay, here's our top candidates. And then I went through, I looked at it, and I said, okay, these are our top 8 people that we have. And so what we did is we took those 12 to 15 quarterfinalists, if you will, and we brought 8 of them into our studio for in-person auditions, because you can be good in a 60-second video that you shoot on your phone, but I wanted to see how they were on camera in a studio setting. And so we brought those 8 people in and ran them through auditions of working, number one, in the studio, but also mixing through different talent, because just as important as the knowledge and the passion, you had to have good chemistry with your co-host. Like, this wasn't going to be a solo person show. And so we started to mix in all these different people with other people. And basically I had them do like 5-minute segments at a time, where I would throw out, 1 or 2 or 3 topics and have them discuss as a trio to do it. And one of the other differences that we had from Bay Area, where they only had 2, I felt like 3 would work a little bit better. Okay. Because 3 allows you to have more of a free-flowing conversation. And it also, in moments, doesn't force people to do heavy lifting. Like, if you didn't want to be a huge part of a conversation that Matt and Sabine were having, you didn't feel like you had to jump in. But if it were just you and Matt doing the show, you both would feel this weight of having to carry the conversation. But to me, 3 was a much better dynamic. And so we were doing all of these rotations within our auditions of 3 people. And after that, we spent a couple weeks rewatching the auditions and looking it over. And then we brought back, for the final group, did we bring back 5 or 6?
I think it was 6.
I think you're right. And so we did our semifinals with 8. Then we did our final auditions with 6. And quite frankly, and I'll share it here, in the group of the semifinals of 8, when we put Matt, Big Dave, and Sabine together, I knew 30 seconds into that group they were going to be the show. I just knew it. Like they had this chemistry that just absolutely shined on camera, and everybody around me could feel it, right? Like you're in the control room, you're with like seasoned production people, the director and the crew, and a minute into their first audition with the three of them sitting down together, the crew's cracking and they're laughing and they're like into it, like they're engaged into it. Like in those moments, we did like 2 hours of auditions, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there are times in which it's like, all right, let's just get this over with, you know. But I knew instantly that the three of them were going to be the show, right? Even if no one else knew it, I knew it, and I was gonna. I'll be damned if I wasn't gonna convince people that this was it. This was gonna work. And so basically, we went from 8 to 6, and the 6 was really about finding the right chemistry of who we're going to have on. And quite frankly, to me, the way I approached it is I knew, number one, Big Dave was going to be on the show, and I wanted to pick 2 people that were going to fit best with Big Dave. Like that was it. That like those auditions and mixing people in and out was about finding the 2 people who complemented you best. And so that's what we did. We did that round of 6 auditions, and it's not to say any of the other 3, or quite frankly, any of the other 5, or anyone who auditioned couldn't have done a good job.
They were all good.
We had some really talented people.
Your Dave would tell me, man, everyone's good.
Dude, everybody.
They were engaging. They were funny. And we know we've had Alana, even Fred, and Harrison Sanford, who was extremely talented.
Yeah.
On who was a finalist, who was really came. You know, he was like the last one out. And so we basically did the final audition, and then we asked our executives at Stanford for their opinion. And then myself, Shipman, Allardyce, and Kevin Cross sat in a conference room, and we fought it out for who was going to be on the show. And we didn't agree initially on who the 3 should have been, but I got my way. So it worked out. And so now here we are 2 years later with the show. But that audition process was so much fun for me, and it was so rewarding, and really also once we had settled on Dave Sabine and Matt, and then it became, all right, let's grow, let's cultivate them, let's use the preseason as a way for them to get comfortable with what we're doing, and just go from there. And as you know, I gave you guys consistent and constant feedback every night after the show. And there were a couple guidelines that we had for the show, but for the most part, the show was what they wanted it to be. Yeah. Like we never had a single show in which I came down and said, okay, here are the 4 topics you're going to do in the show. Go. Right. Like it wasn't like that. Like we would have a conversation. We would go, all right, to the 3 of them, what are the most important storylines to you that you want to talk about? Right. We would have that conversation every night, because for the show to work, it had to be from the heart, and it had to be organic from what they wanted to be, because they're the fans. Like the show had to be for them and by them. And it had to be a situation in which on a nightly basis, they were going, okay, I want to talk about the offense. I want to talk about the coaching. I want to talk about this specific player, whatever it might be. I want to talk about big picture. And we would have fun with it. Like the NBA is fun. NBA Twitter is fun. And so we would do things that, you know, whether it's an outfit that a player wore, ideas that they came up with, and then we just made it great in my mind. And I think it really resonated with the audience.
Yeah, it's so much fun to do. And I'll let you in on it, because I don't think I told you this, Kev, but I remember at that audition, I just remember how uncomfortable I was the first one, which is weird because Matt thought I was a plant when we came in there. He told me, he said, nah, dude. He said, this dude came in and he was cool with everybody immediately. He was like, this dude has to work here already, and he has to be a plant. Like this, he thought I wasn't real. Yeah. And I was super uncomfortable just because I went through a bunch of stuff just to get there that day. Like my Uber broke down on the way there, and I got lost, and I couldn't find anything. Then my phone, went out, and it was a crazy day. And I remember you when I got there because you kept saying, "I want y'all to be yourselves," and I didn't believe you. And I remember not believing you because, look, as a black man, I'm not used to hearing this. As a black dude, who dresses as I do with the hair that I have, I'm not used to hearing just be who you are. And as silly as I am, I'm not used to hearing, I'm used to hearing be in this box. So that's why I came in with my hair pulled back anyway. And I had on, like, I wasn't comfortably dressed. Like I had on, I looked awesome, but I wasn't comfortably dressed. And I was so uncomfortable, doing everything that I was doing, that even when it finished that first one, I didn't think about it again. I was like, yeah, I told Chris, I was like, yeah, I sucked. I was like, I don't think I'm gonna get there. I was like, I ain't even worried about it. So it didn't cross my mind anymore. And then when you gave me that call and said you wanted me to come back, for that semifinal round, and that moment I told myself, I said, you know what? If they're not gonna take me, it's gonna be because I was being me. It's not gonna be because I wasn't being who I was.
Right.
So that's why when I came in with my hoodie on and some shorts, what I'm saying? I was just super comfortable. And I was like, whatever you fine. You're just not going to like me just because you don't like me. And when I did that audition, I felt it in my soul that I did the best I possibly could. And I knew I just did my best. And I said, well, I'll just leave it at that. So when you called me that night and told me that I had it, it was the weirdest feeling because I'm just sitting there in my drawers, just, chilling. And it was just like, what? And I don't know if you remember it, but you're talking, and honestly, I'm not hearing a word you're saying. I'm just sitting there on stuck for like 30 seconds of silence. Like I couldn't even say anything. Like I didn't know what to do, but I always appreciated you for that because you kept stressing that to me, to be who you were, and you meant it. And that was that you actually meant what you were saying. So that was very important.
Because the challenge is when you have people who've never been on TV before coming into that environment, they tend to like want to be like people they've seen. Like they want to be Skip Bayless, right? They essentially, you want to be this caricature of what you've seen on TV. And that it never works because it's not authentic. Mm-hmm. And I stress to you and every single person to be yourself, because you can fake being somebody else on TV for 5 minutes. You can fake being on TV for even a half hour at times, but it's not like the viewer is going to instantly recognize after a few shows, even a few minutes, of someone is being disingenuous.
Yeah.
And so in order to develop that chemistry and develop that feeling we wanted from the show, being that this is three fans talking about the team that they love, we couldn't have anybody being fake. It just wouldn't work. And so, like I just stress to everybody, be yourself. Just be who you are. Like I want you to come into the show audition in the show as if you were going to a Bulls game. Like wear the exact same thing you would wear to a Bulls game. If you'd wear that to a Bulls game, come on the show with it. And so that's like the feeling we want to get across. And you're absolutely right, because like I didn't want you or anybody else to be this model of what you think we wanted, or even what you think you should be, right? Like just be Big Dave, be Savon, be Matt, like be Alana, like you be yourself. And that's truly what matters. And I think that is one of like the key ingredients to putting a successful show of that nature on the air, is just by having that genuine personality come out of people.
Yeah.
When Dave told me that you wanted someone genuine, I knew you had a job, because just working with Dave and like the way in general, how we approach what we do on the side, we shy away from being fake. We're just trying to be ourselves, so to speak. So when they told me that, I'm like, oh no, that's you got this. Your personality and the fact that you're not going to be fake, because you can't do that. You don't know how to do that.
I really don't.
And the way you represent yourselves, that we represent ourselves through all the years, our mantra is not to be fake, right, Dave? Is to be yourself, and Dave's always been that way.
Yeah.
You know, and Dave, you know, has always called out if you're faking corny. You know, it's okay to be corny, but be corny, being corny.
Right.
And so,
exactly.
so when Dave told me that you want him to be genuine, I'm like, dude, you got this, man. You know, you're not going to put on airs in front of anybody. So I was confident he's going to get the gig like right away.
Do you think part of that, and for both of you, do you think part of that is being black and then coming into what is sometimes more of a white environment or like a professional environment? Like, was that part of it?
Yeah. No, 100%. That was a part of it. Even when I did the video for you all, I had my hair pulled back.
Right.
Like even when I did that, I was like, yeah, I don't know if they're gonna want to see that. No, it is strictly and 100% because I was a black man and with this hair and looking like that. It had nothing to do with anything else. That is strictly what it was. And Chris just said, like, I'm comfortable in my skin 24/7. Like, I'm comfortable being me and who I am around any situation. Chris will tell you I like going into bad situations because I like it. You know what I'm saying? I like going around people who don't like me. I thoroughly enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? I really like that. But yeah, no, it definitely had a lot and everything to do with that because I'm like, I didn't see anybody on television that looked like me. Like I didn't see it. I didn't see it. And talking about sports, you know, like that. Like I didn't see me. So I didn't know what to bounce that off of. You know, I would see Peanut Tillman, you know, and I would see guys like that, but I'm like, but they played, you know what I'm saying? Like, these are millionaires and things like that. I didn't just, right. I didn't see the regular Joe, you know what I'm saying? Even though I you know, 2 college degrees and all this other stuff, but it's still regular Joe status, you know what I'm saying? For me, I didn't see that person, you know, who loves music and, you know, wants to talk, you know, Marvel and Star Wars all day long and, you know, do all this, just laugh and talk all this stuff. I didn't see that. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, well, if I don't see it reflected, how can I know that that's what you want? So again, you just saying, just be me is music to my ears. It's just like, oh, that's it. All right.
You know what, Kev? It's funny from my outside, like as a fan, you know, I'm fortunate to know Big Dave, obviously. And because of my friend, I know, like, I'm very cynical personally. And so if I would never knew Big Dave or met Matt or John, early on, I thought this show was fake as hell. I'm like, no way in the world. They tell them guys what to say. You know, they can't say certain things. It's all fake. You know, they're kind of cool, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that, you know, the people upstairs tell them what to do and what to say. I'm so glad I know him and I met everyone because now I know it's real. It's real. And I know I'm not the only cynical person out there where watching this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So it's just so cool that, you know, you allow them to be themselves, and they are being themselves. They're not being told what to do, what to say, how to look, how to present themselves. That's who they are. Yeah. And so I think having them be authentic on the air, and giving them the leeway to discuss topics, go on tangents, and that flexibility, you know, really comes through as authentic after 2 years.
One major rule that we had, because there are guidelines we have to operate under, but the one major rule that we had is you can't make it personal, right? If you think the coach is an awful coach and a clown, you can't come out and say this guy's just a bad coach in terms of he's no good, he's a bum. You can't make it personal. Right. You can come out and say specifically, I didn't like his rotation in this position. I thought that he had the wrong mix of 5 guys on the floor in the fourth quarter. It should have been this. I don't like the way he's blitzing on the pick and roll. I don't like the way he's got Wendell Carter utilized. Whatever it might be, you can criticize X's and O's all day long. You just can't make it personal. Like for instance, and this is something we even tell Kendall and Will. If there's a player who's really struggling, you never say that the player is lazy. You never say the player isn't just putting in the work. Like, unless you know that for a fact, you can't say that. You can say that a player is really not reading the defense correctly, or he's in the wrong position, the wrong spot on the floor he's supposed to be in. You can say that he is obviously struggling, the jump shot's not falling. Maybe he needs to pass up that shot. That's not good shot selection. Any of those things you can criticize all day long about X's and O's. You just can't make it personal. And so that's like the one main guideline that we gave the guys with doing the show.
Yeah, I like the fact you brought up Kim again with Purdue because Because what are your thoughts? I want to hear your thoughts about the interesting contrast between the shows. Suits, ex-NBA players, and then immediately goes to hoodies and T-shirts and hats. And although they have the same guidelines, the shows are still dramatically different. Can you talk about what do you expect from that contrast of having outsiders immediately follow that sort of 50, 20, 30-year-old sort of format to this new format?
Yeah, and so that was the whole point, right? We didn't want to do another post-game show. We didn't want to have Mark and Kendall will or Jason Kendall will do the post-game show, and then all of a sudden we were doing another post-game show. There's no point in doing that whatsoever. And so we wanted to feel the show to be completely different. And, going back to the whole concept of the show is that you want the show to be fans talking about the game, talking about the team. And so from a dress standpoint, we wanted the outsiders to be comfortable and be more relaxed. And part of that is having them be physically comfortable with how they're sitting and physically comfortable in what they're wearing. Like if they came out every show and wore a suit and tie, the feel of the show would be very different. Both from a viewer standpoint and them doing the show, it would be very different immediately because of how they're dressed. Because that makes a big difference in how relaxed you are. Nobody comes home from work after a long day and puts on a suit and tie and sits on their couch. Right? Who would do that? There's no point in that. What do you put on? Yeah. You put on your shorts, you put on your sweats, you put on your warm-up pants, T-shirt. That's your I am relaxed and hanging out outfit right now. All right, and that's kind of the feeling we wanted them to have, to be relaxed, and also to get it across to the viewer that this is a different show. Mm-hmm. You're not just going to watch another 30 minutes of a post-game show. Mm-hmm. And so one of the big things that we did is, number one, how they looked in terms of what they wore, no suits and ties. Number two is we wanted the content of the show to be different. They weren't doing breakdowns. They weren't doing Kendall going up on the big board and explaining on how when you blitz on the pick and roll, it's up to the backside defender to rotate over early at that time or you get burned. We didn't want them to do those things. Mm-hmm. They could certainly talk about it, but we didn't want them to do this X's and O's breakdown type thing. We wanted them to be fans, more from a general point of view than a very nuanced point of view. And so that we didn't run many highlights in the show. We ran occasionally highlights during the show, and one of my favorite aspects of the show is when we did a highlight and Big Dave would do a highlight, because it was absolutely amazing and so much fun when we would do a highlight and Dave would do his play-by-play. It just became a thing, and it was so great. But we didn't run many highlights in the show because we didn't need to, because we wanted to be three fans in a living room, three fans at a bar, three friends at a bar talking about the game they just watched. That was the whole concept. We wanted to be three friends who quite amazingly had never met each other prior to us doing the show, but developed this chemistry that, quite frankly, I think the three of you will be friends for life because of this experience and being on the show. Yeah, pretty much. And that comes across on TV. So we wanted three friends to talk about the game that they just watched. That's not what the post-game show is, right? The post-game show is a professional host and former players dissecting and breaking down what the viewer just saw, right? That's what a post-game show is. And then tossing in, interviews with people and things of that nature, and breaking it down from a very intelligent basketball point of view is what the post-game show is. And that's not to say that the Outsiders can't be an intelligent basketball show, because they are, but it had to come from a place of a fan, not from a former player.
Yeah, I don't think we could have done that if we weren't, intelligent, in what we were saying.
Yes, if you don't know your stuff, people recognize it.
Yeah, immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's what comes across. That comes across as they are validating the intelligence of the fans, because they describe what they see, of course, different terms than maybe Gill or Purdue would do. So when I see them, or a fan sees them on TV, validating, I am seeing this, and they're talking in the fans' language, right?
Yeah.
Right? And that validation, I think, is what's really key. Is is that they're like me and they think like me and they talk like me. And they're smart, so I'm smart too as well. Okay, I do understand basketball. I know what's going on. I'm invested in my team and in the show.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that, man. All right, Kel, I got one more question for you. Then I really want to talk about the Bulls, but I want to know, as long as you've been in, the business, who is the one person that you saw that you were just starstruck? Because for me, it was two people. It was when I first saw Will Perdue walk into a room. It was like, whoa, that's Will Perdue, dude. Like, it blew me away. And when I saw Mark Shanowski, like I can't tell you how many times I would be on the phone with Chris and I would just be like, dude, I know Mark Shanowski. Like, like it's so insane.
Yeah.
Like, that's Mark Shanowski. Like, I've been having conversations with Mark. It would just blow me away. So who was it for you that you just saw and you were just completely starstruck by?
So when you're growing up in Maryland as a young boy in the 1980s, everybody had the same hero. Everybody. Cal Ripken Jr. Cal was the pinnacle of what every kid in Maryland wanted to be at the time, right? Like he was the superstar. He quite frankly saved baseball in 1995 after the strike, and so I had the opportunity when I was an intern to meet Cal because I was covering Orioles games. So I was interning over the summer, and obviously the Orioles were playing. In fact, I'll share one of my favorite stories in broadcasting with you right now. So this is in 1997, and the way it worked is the media would be in the press box watching the game would end, and then they go down to the tunnel underneath the ballpark, Camden Yards, and wait outside the Orioles clubhouse before they open the clubhouse to the media. And media would go in, they would talk to several key players of the game, talk to the manager, you would get your post-game sound, and be done for the night, right? And so the way that worked is you'd have a contingent of probably a dozen to 12 to 20 different media members from radio, TV, newspapers, waiting outside the clubhouse to go in and do their job. And I can remember there was at the time a little boy who was probably 8 years old and his mom, and for some reason they had won something or had gotten an opportunity, and they were supposed to talk to Eric Davis, who was one of the Orioles at the time.
Yeah.
And they were waiting outside the Orioles clubhouse in the tunnel with all the rest of us waiting to talk to Eric Davis. And at some point, Eric Davis was going to come out and spend 5 minutes with them and talk with them, sign some autographs, whatever it might be. And so there's a clubhouse attendant that is basically waiting with the media, and he's got a watch, and he's waiting for the go-ahead to open the clubhouse for the media to come in. And so this is in this like 15-minute, 10-minute time period that the media is all gathered around. We're just waiting to go into the clubhouse to get our post-game sound. And the door opens up, and Cal Ripken sticks his head out to talk to the clubhouse attendant. There was something he wanted to talk to him about. And meanwhile, this little kid and his mom are standing right next to the clubhouse attendant. And Cal opens the door, and this kid's eyes go like as big as saucers. Right? This is in 97. Cal's a superstar at this point. But there's this 8-year-old kid, and he is absolutely awestruck of Cal right there. And Cal, I don't know if he gave him a glance, but was talking to the clubhouse attendants about something, and their conversation wrapped up, and Cal was about to go back inside the clubhouse, and this kid's mom clearly recognized what Cal meant to her son, right? Like you absolutely know that he's got posters on the wall, Cal Ripken Jr., and even though he was there to meet Eric Davis, Cal's probably his tops, right? And so his mom instantly recognizes what is happening here and says, Mr. Ripken, this is my son, Billy. He's a big fan of yours. Just wanted to say hi. And Cal spends 5 minutes talking to this kid. And it was like amazing that like I'm 5 feet away from him, right? I'm just watching this entire interaction, and Cal is being completely genuine, and he's talking to this kid about baseball, asking him, well, what position do you play? Oh, okay, well, I don't know if he said shortstop or not, but Cal's talking baseball with this kid and asking this kid about what's going on in his life. And for 5 minutes, made this kid feel like he was the only person in the world. And then Cal says, I got to go back to the clubhouse. Nice meeting you, Billy, whatever it is. Shake his hand, shakes the mom hand, and goes back inside. And this kid breaks into tears instantly. Like just streaming down his face over the emotion of what he just experienced, right? Because he just probably talked to his biggest hero in the world. And that moment encapsulates what Cal meant to any little boy in Maryland during the 80s and 90s. And it also speaks to how genuine Cal Ripken Jr. is as an individual. And so I had interviewed Cal many times as a reporter or as a producer getting sound and post-game sound. And so the first time I was really awestruck is when I got to have a one-on-one conversation with Cal, right? He's the only person that I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm talking to Cal Ripken Jr., right? Because you never think that your life is going to go in a certain direction and who you're going to meet at certain times. And so he's the only one. And I've had a chance to talk to a lot of really well-known people and well-known athletes. He's the only one that I've ever talked to that was kind of like a surreal experience for myself where I'm like, can you believe you're talking to this guy right now? If I ever got a chance to talk to Magic, I think the same thing would probably occur. But outside of Cal, that's the only time that's ever happened for me. And there's a kind of saying, never meet your heroes because you'll always be let down.
Right.
Which I think probably 90% of the time is probably really good advice. But every interaction I've had with Cal and every interaction I've seen him have with other people, like he's the real deal, man. He's the real deal. I mean, I've had private, because Cal, after his post-game career has gone into broadcasting, he's done other things, and I've had a chance to have several conversations with Cal over the last 20 years, and the dude is awesome. So for me, he was like the one guy I've ever talked to that's like, wow, this is pretty cool.
And of course, the classic video game. You can't forget about that either.
But, which video game?
The Cal Ripken baseball.
Oh, yeah. The Genesis? I'm trying to think of what platform.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, man. That's an awesome story, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, Kev, but you mentioned two other guys that you really admired. Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to meet them?
So I met Wilbon by chance because when he was living in Chicago doing PTI, as you guys may know, the Chicago Sun-Times used to be located on the same building that we were in, the Holiday Inn building where we are in the basement of that building right next to the Merchandise Mart. And so Wilbon would often, they had a built-in studio in the Sun-Times, up there on the upper floors. So he would often, whether they leased out space or however they did it, he would go to the Sun-Times and use their camera and sometimes do PTI that way or do remote shots for ESPN that way. And I happened to be walking through the Merchandise Mart one day, and I'm seeing Wilbon walk 15 feet away from me. I'm like, holy shit, Wilbon. And he was walking alone, and I'm not going to introduce myself. It's freaking Michael Wilbon. And I say, Michael, I'm Kevin Anderson. I work for Comcast Sportsnet Chicago at the time. Wanted to say you do an amazing job, and I've been reading your work ever since I was a kid for the Washington Post. And he was very kind and genuine about it and said thank you. And I actually have the column he wrote. I like to save certain things, as you guys have probably have guessed from our conversation so far. I got the front page of the sports section from November 8th, 1991, saved. Do you know the significance of that date? Or the day after, what happened the day before, because it's the newspaper.
Fill us in, because I sure don't.
November 7th, 1991 is the date that Magic Johnson announced he was HIV positive. Which is, like I mentioned before about like the Challenger disaster, that moment in which you find out and are like watching his press conference is like that like shook my world, because Magic's my favorite player of all time.
Yeah.
And that obviously was a moment in NBA history that will never be forgotten. And quite frankly, what Magic was able to accomplish for the awareness of HIV and AIDS around the world, because he came public with that, and the awareness that was brought because he did that, and then people just being more knowledgeable about what exactly HIV was and how you get it. And so I saved the sports page with Kornheiser and Wilbon's column from November 8th, 91 from the Washington Post, because it just meant that, because the two of them wrote from the heart in those columns. And it was so personal to them to write about Magic and what him going public meant, what they meant to him. And so it was like I told Wilbon, I said, I saved that piece because it meant so much to me. And he thanked me, and I had like a 5-minute conversation with him, and he went on his way. But yeah, it's what's also interesting, getting back a little bit, my 2 favorite players growing up in baseball were Cal Ripken Jr. and then Frank Thomas.
Hurt.
I loved Frank's game.
Yeah.
Like Frank, even though I'm from Maryland, like watching the Orioles who play White Sox obviously on a pretty consistent basis, and they were also on WGN, the White Sox were at the time. So I got to see Frank play a lot. And so Frank was my second favorite player growing up, throughout the 90s. And so I've had and now continue to have a working relationship with Frank Thomas.
Yeah.
So like that part is a little bit surreal to me, that I continue to work with Frank and as far as a broadcasting standpoint. So yeah, from I've had a chance to meet Wilbon, have not met Tony Kornheiser, but Wilbon was very gracious in the conversation that we had together for that 5 minutes. And it's been a pretty cool experience so far.